Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to AJ 102. And this week we're going to be going over Chapter 7 for our lecture, and the title is Policing After 9/11, Traditional, Community, and Data-Driven Policing. And I think that you'll be able to see as we kind of move through this chapter that there are a lot of different strategies that are in place after 9/11 to not just get good intelligence, but also get good information that you can get out there to your patrol officers to make sure that you are properly protecting the communities that you serve. With that being said, on page 234 of your textbook, make sure that you go through the definitions on there because, again, a lot of those will help you. Now, this is a pretty long chapter, and while there are not very many slides to go through, there's going to be a lot of information. So I'm going to be moving through this chapter probably a little more quickly than I normally would because there's a lot of information to fit in. So to begin with, this chapter looks at 5 strategies currently operating, most often in some combination in departments throughout the country. And these are problem-solving strategy. This chapter begins with a discussion of community policing and then turns to what they call problem-solving policing, which may or may not involve the community and may or may not be data-driven. The third area of discussion, CompStat policing, like community policing and problem-solving policing, began before the events of 9/11, but continues to be embraced by many departments and has had a very profound effect on the next 2 strategies discussed, and that now dominate literature, which really are intelligence-led and evidence-based policing. And we'll talk a little bit more about what those are by definition. But Chapter 1, if you can kind of think back that far, introduced an emerging 4th era of policing, and we talked about that, the data-driven policing. Which not only remains remains today, but retains the key elements of traditional professional policing, random patrol, rapid response, and reactive investigation, but combines them with the essential elements of community policing, partnerships, problem solving, and prevention. The emergence of this 4th era of policing can be traced directly back to one specific event, and that's something that we all remember: September 11th, 2001, 9/11, the terrorist attacks on the United States. And this single event has led to a paradigm shift in policing, dramatically altering the importance placed on information sharing and fostering a variety of data-driven approaches to policing. So the 5 broad strategic or organizational approaches currently operating in contemporary policing are community policing, problem-solving policing, CompStat policing, intelligent-led policing, and evidence-based policing. So here they are on a list. We've kind of gone over these already by way of introduction, and then we're going to start to kind of move into the contemporary community policing philosophy and model. So since the 1980s, community policing has been a dominant innovation in American policing. Community policing is a philosophy that promotes organizational strategies that support the systematic use of partnerships and problem-solving techniques to proactively, remember that word, address the immediate conditions that give rise to public safety issues such as crime, social disorder, and fear of crime. Community policing stresses working, there's that word again, proactively in partnership with citizens to prevent crime and to solve crime-related myths. So again, community policing, a philosophy that promotes organizational strategies that support systematic use of partnerships and problem-solving techniques that proactively address those immediate conditions. And a myth that's out there is that community policing is soft on crime and focuses more on social work and law enforcement, and that's simply not true. The reality is the philosophy behind community policing is to work in partnership with the community to effectively deter crime and solve problems. That focus causes the police and citizens to address underlying problems and actively engage a way to address them. In an effective community policing environment, it is more difficult for crimes to thrive than compared to a traditional policing environment. So it's not really soft like you think it is. It just kind of sounds like it a little bit. So continuing on here, the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights, as well as federal and state statutes and local ordinances, establish this whole thing that we talk about called social contract or social components. And yeah, so I'm gonna back up a little bit, sorry, because there's just a lot to fill in here. Americans established a criminal justice system in an effort to live in peace, free from fear of crime, fear itself, and violence. To ensure the peace, U.S. citizens have also entered into basically an unwritten social contract, which stipulates that for everyone to receive justice, each person must give up or relinquish a little bit of freedom. In civilized society, people cannot simply just do as they please. Okay, there are laws and there are ordinances that they have to abide by. They are expected to conform to federal and state laws as well as to local rules and regulations established by and for the community in which they live. Increased mobility and economic factors have basically weakened the informal social contract that once helped keep the peace. As a result, the police, as agents of that social contract, have had to fill the breach, or the cracks, if you will, and the need for law-abiding citizens to join with the police in making their communities free from fear, drugs, crime, and terrorism. The importance of community in this is that it's got to be a partnership. So what is community? And why is that even kind of important? Well, community has many different definitions. It can refer to a social group or class having common interests. Community may even refer to society as a whole, the public. This text, however, the textbook we're using here, has a specific, very simplistic meaning for community. And here it is. Community refers to the specific geographic area served by a police department or law enforcement agency and the individuals, organizations, and agencies within that area. Police officers have to truly understand and be part of this defined community if they are going to basically be successful. So it's the geographic area that you work in, which really kind of defines that community piece. Also of importance are the individual values, concerns, and cultural principles of the people living and working within the community and the common interests they share with their neighbors. So that's a very important thing that we don't want to lose sight of. And we're going to talk a little bit more here in a few minutes about the changes in management style and organizations and things like that. But right now we're going to kind of keep on the community policing concept here and make sure we get some of these other definitions in. So as we continue to look at community policing and communities as a whole, we come across this definition called social capital. Communities might also be looked at in terms of this word social capital. a concept developed by a gentleman by the name of Coleman back in 1990. You can read more about it on page 302 in your textbook if you're bored, and defines it as this: a variety of different entities having two characteristics in common. They all consist of some aspect of social structure, and they all facilitate certain actions of individuals who are within the structure. Social capital exists at two levels, local and public. Local social capital is the bond among family members and their immediate informal groups. Public social capital refers to networks tying individuals to broader community institutions such as schools, civic organizations, churches, and something similar to that. So we say all that now to move into a theory, and I'm going to skip ahead real quick, so don't, yeah. Okay, so we're going to back up here, and we're going to keep going through this particular social model individual information. So we say a lot of this stuff about community policing, and then we come to a very debated, if you will, or classic article, and it's called the broken windows theory. And in this classical article, the police and neighborhoods basically work together to deal with this phenomenon called the broken windows phenomenon or the broken windows theory. And the defined phenomenon itself, the broken windows phenomenon, suggests that if it appears no one cares, so imagine a neighborhood with homes and businesses and things like that. So it suggests here that if it appears no one cares, disorder and crime will thrive. And this was brought about by the authors were Wilson and Keeling back in 1982. So it suggests that if it appears no one cares, disorder and crime will thrive. Wilson and Keeling based their broken windows theory partly on research done in 1969 by a Stanford psychologist. And we'll talk more about that experiment where they basically parked a couple of vehicles in two different places. And well, let's go through it now. It's probably easier to go. So this Stanford psychologist, Philip Zimbrano arranged to have a car without license plates parked with its hood up on a street in the Bronx and a comparable vehicle on a similar street in Palo Alto, California. The car in the Bronx was attacked by vandals within 10 minutes, and within 24 hours it had been totally destroyed and stripped of anything of value. The car in Palo Alto, however, sat untouched. After a week, Zimbrano took a sledgehammer to the vehicle. People passing by soon joined in, and within a few hours that car was totally destroyed. Unintended property becomes fair game for people out of fun, or basically what they call plunder, or even for people who ordinarily would not dream of doing such things and who probably consider themselves law-abiding. So broken windows and trashed cars are very visible signs of people not caring about their community. Other more subtle signs include unmown lawns, piles of accumulated trash, litter, graffiti, abandoned buildings, drunkenness, fighting, prostitution, and things like that. So basically kind of what they're saying here is that that broken windows phenomenon maintains that if a neighborhood is allowed to run down, it will give the impression that nobody really cares in the neighborhood, and because of that, crime will start to flourish. And that vehicle, that car experiment that I talked about kind of gives you a little taste of that exact theory. So how do we kind of partner up with our citizens in our communities, and how do we really start to bring about that organizational change, that philosophy of partnerships and things that we're going to talk about a little bit more as we start to kind of move through some of these things here? Well, it really does come down to kind of involving and educating the citizens, the community members that you have. And there are things that you can do to kind of help there. Um, and I'm going to have you read your textbook on a lot of these, and I'm just going to kind of touch on them. So, citizen patrols, community policing is rooted in law enforcement's dependence on the public's eyes, ears, and information, and influence to exert social control. And while citizen patrols aren't new, they are certainly widespread amongst several law enforcement agencies where we use citizen volunteers and citizen patrols to go out there and be those eyes and ears. Citizen police academies, another type of community involvement, is through citizen police academies designed to basically help familiarize citizens with law enforcement and to keep the department in touch with the community. These are great things to do. Ride-along programs, very popular, a little bit controversial, but these programs are designed to give local citizens a close-up look at the realities of policing and what police work really does entail, while giving officers a chance to kind of connect with citizens in a positive way. The two critical key elements of community policing here, as we start talking about these more and more, are partnerships and problem solving. So kind of keep those in mind as we start to move through more of these concepts. Now, community partnerships are crucial for police agencies serious about community policing. Community policing can't succeed without them. Collaborations maybe with businesses, schools, youth, residents, organizations, the media, private security, and other government agencies, depending upon the problem and who the stakeholders are. Partnerships usually result in a more effective solution to a problem because of what they call shared responsibility and resources and shared goals. They also foster a shared feeling of ownership through having a vested interest in whatever the matter might have been, whatever the problem is. Police-public partnerships exist on two levels. On a more passive level, the community assumes a compliant role and shows support of law enforcement in order by what they do not do. They don't interfere with routine police activities, and they do not themselves engage in conduct that basically disrupts the public peace. On an active level, citizens step beyond their daily law-abiding lives and get directly involved in projects, programs, and other specific efforts to enhance their community safety. This type of participation may include things like neighborhood watch, citizen patrol, youth-oriented education and recreation programs. So there are a lot of things, again, that are out there that we can truly kind of work on. And when you look at contemporary community policing, you'll start to see kind of what I mean. And then the center of all of this stuff is this trust factor. So here is a kind of a diagram. It's on page 243 in your book, and it really shows the core components of successful collaboration and partnerships. So when you look at this, you can see that at the center of all of this, of course, is trust, and you can read around yourself, but you see action plan, stakeholders, shared vision, common goals, expertise, teamwork, open communication, motivated partnerships, and sufficient means. So all of these lend themselves to, really starting to see how that community policing and problem solving type thing works. As we move on a little bit, though, I want to make sure that we're hitting on some key components and that we're not going to miss some of these. And let me back up for a minute because, again, this chapter kind of skips around a little bit. So as we go through, and we just looked at this kind of diagram of core components of a successful program, I mentioned some of the partnerships up there, and one of them is with private security. In years past, much competition, animosity existed between public and private police. Public law enforcement officers regarded private security as kind of like wannabes, and those in the private sector considered public police officers kind of ego-inflated crime fighters who often kind of held themselves to be above the law a little bit. Recently, however, and over the last several years, these two groups have learned to work together quite a bit more efficiently to ensure the common goals of public safety. The private sector owns and basically protects about, well, probably 80 to 85% of the nation's infrastructure, and the workforce guiding this infrastructure is significantly larger than the public police forces. So with private security officers outnumbering sworn law enforcement officers probably 3 to 1, you can see where private security partnerships becomes very, very important. To effectively protect the nation's infrastructure, law enforcement and private security, they really have to work together. So keep in mind, though, that private security officers differ from police officers in that private security officers are salaried with private funds and are responsible to an employer and have limited authority extending to only the premises to which they are hired to guard, etc. Private security officers really have no authority to carry concealed weapons, although they can carry unconcealed weapons unless otherwise authorized. They really don't have any authority to make arrests except a citizen's arrest. But even that part of private security is evolving a little bit as well. Now, the other partnerships that are there, we talked about private security, school and law enforcement partnerships, that kind of speaks to itself. Partnerships with the media, that's a real important one. And what's one interesting phrase that comes about when you talk about participating in partnerships with the media would be a phrase called the symbiotic relationship, and basically meaning a mutually dependent relationship, one dependent on the other. So the police and the media share what they call that symbiotic relationship. They are mutually dependent on each other. The police and members of the media share the common goal of serving the public. Police departments and individual officers rely on the press to disseminate vital public safety information to the community and to reach out to the community for help on solving cases. At the same time, reporters rely on the police for information, to provide their readers and viewers with information. So, we're not always on the same page, although we do, at the end of the day, we do have some goals that are, similar, if you will. Changes in management style, and we're still on this slide right here because we're trying to fit all this stuff in. Community policing usually requires a different management style than kind of the old one, the old style. The traditional autocratic style, effective during the industrial age, really doesn't have the same impact in the 21st century where we're at, right now. One valuable alternative to autocratic style of management is this thing called participatory leadership. And in participatory leadership, each individual has a voice in decisions, but top management still has the ultimate decision-making authority. And on your book, on page 248, you can look down and you can see some of the things that kind of move that participatory leadership style forward. So I'm not going to go through all of those. I'll let you look at those yourself. Resistance to community policing, yeah, there's going to be some. And some of those come from organizations, the actual organization itself. So many officers have difficulty accepting or appreciating the community-oriented policing philosophy. Some wonder whether the officers will or should readily accept the increased accountability that accompanies greater decision-making responsibilities. And you have that in this community policing realm. So you'll have some organizational impediments meaning resistance from, say, middle management, line officers. You might even have resistance to change from your police union. You might have some community impediments, community resistance. The community's concerned that, community policing is soft on crime. And we've heard that before, although it's really not, it's just a strategy. And then there may be some transitional or transition impediments. How do you transition into this community policing thing when you've been doing something else for so long? Common pitfalls in making the transition to community policing include things like unrealistic expectations and focusing on short-term instead of long-term results. Adapting or adopting a task force type approach, resisting the move towards community empowerment, and misrepresenting basically an inadequate program as legitimate in order to receive funding. So these are some things that are out there, but honestly, from what I've seen over like 34 years, once you can get past the initial hump, if you will, of resistance, it's really going to be something really good. And then finally, when you evaluate progress, failure should be basically noted or considered just as important as successes, because this way you'll learn what doesn't work. So when you implement some of these programs, you'll be able to see that, hey, maybe this isn't working and we need to do something else. So now let's kind of move on to, and we talked about that, let's move on to the problem solving component of it, some key elements to community policing, and then we'll talk about the SARA model. So we're kind of back on track with the slides now. So I apologize for a little bit off trackness, if you will, but sometimes these things aren't quite in order, but we're kind of where we need to be now. So problem solving policing. Problem solving policing and community policing are sometimes deemed kind of the same, and however they're really not. Problem solving policing is an essential strategy of community policing. It's focusing on determining the underlying causes of problems, including crime, and identifying solutions. So a department-wide strategy aimed at solving persistent community problems. Police identify, analyze, and respond to the underlying circumstances that create those incidents. So the community policing is the philosophy. The problem-solving component is digging a little bit deeper and trying to determine what are the underlying causes of that. Problem-solving requires police to group incidents and thereby identify the underlying causes of whatever those issues are in the community. So basically identifying incidents, and an incident is basically an isolated event that requires a police response, or an event that requires it. So some key elements of problem solving policing are listed in your text on page 254. I'm not going to go through all of them because I'm going to have you take the time to read through those, because I want you to read those. We're going to move on quickly now to the SARA model of problem solving, because this is a real important part. The SARA model, as described by Eck and Spellman in 1987, developed the SARA model of problem solving policing, and the 4 strategies of the SARA model of problem solving policing are scanning, or grouping individual incidents into meaningful problems; analyzing, collecting information from all available sources, not just police data; responding, or selecting and implementing solutions; and then assessing, meaning evaluating the impact of the solution. So 4 strategies used in problem-oriented policing: scan, analyze, respond, and assess. All of these are the model itself. This is how it's basically built. So imagine, if you will, let's say you had a problem of maybe robberies at ATMs. So at nighttime during a certain time. So you could use this model, this SARA model of policing, to scan, okay, grouping all the events into meaningful problems. So using your data, analyzing, collecting information from all available resources, not just police data, responding, meaning selecting and implementing solutions, or assessing and evaluating the impact. So you could use that model to basically come up with a strategy to deal with ATM robberies. As we start to look more at data-driven strategies and what is out there, the first one that comes to mind is going to be this thing called CompStat policing. CompStat policing as a method of management, accountability, and philosophy of crime control. The essence of CompStat, which is short for computer comparison statistics, is that police cannot manage what they don't measure. So CompStat policing is a method of management, accountability, and philosophy of crime control. CompStat is kind of like the old pin maps on steroids. So if you, way back in the olden days, and you'll probably laugh about this, but way back then we used to have these things called pin maps. So if we had a crime, we'd get a big map of the city or the street where things are happening, and we'd stick a little pin in it. And pretty soon you'd have a bunch of pins all over the place. Well, it's kind of pin mapping on steroids. It simply helps to draw sharp attention to problem areas. It puts facts in the place of impressions. So CompStat was first fully operational in 1994 in the New York Police Department and quickly gained popularity. This proactive and outcome-oriented approach to organizing and managing police operations has been described as a vastly new approach to managing police operations, and as such is basically kind of seen as kind of a change agent. And it runs on 4 components. It runs on accurate and timely intelligence, so knowing what is happening; effective tactics, meaning having a plan; rapid response, meaning do it fast or quickly; and then follow-up, relentless follow-up and assessment. If it works, do it more. If it doesn't, do something else. So that in essence is kind of the CompStat strategy. Intelligence-led is a little bit different. When information is gathered and analyzed, it becomes what they call intelligence. Intelligence-led policing, or ILP, is a collaborative law enforcement approach combining problem-solving policing, information sharing, and police accountability with enhanced intelligence operations. And the myth out there is that intelligence-led and data-driven policing are too expensive, especially for smaller agencies where money can be invested in more police officers. Well, that really is a misconception. It works for large or small agencies. The U.S. Department of Justice's Bureau of Justice Assistance, the BJA for short, defines intelligence-led policing as this: a collaborative law enforcement approach combining problem-solving policing, information sharing, and police accountability with enhanced intelligence operations. So that's a little bit of information on the intelligence-led policing. And there's a couple of other factors in here that we're going to touch on: tactical intelligence versus strategic intelligence. We'll take a quick look at that probably, and then we'll start to move on to a couple other things. So 2 types of intelligence are distinguished in discussions of ILP: tactical and strategic. Tactical intelligence is information that is analyzed and contributes directly to a specific incident. Immediate action is usually taken on tactical intelligence. Strategic intelligence, in contrast, is analyzed for information that evolves and develops over time, contributing to a broad scope or a big picture issue, such as maybe planning and resource allocation. Kind of moving on a little bit, there's this thing regarding ethical considerations when you talk about intelligence-led policing. Maintaining ethics and integrity is a ever-present concern and obligation of police. A department using ILP should zealously endorse proactive investigative tactics while maintaining an equal vigilance towards protecting the privacy rights of innocent people and suspects alike. So basically making sure that you're keeping your data and your information close to the cuff, that you're not just throwing information out there. And that's the ethical part of ILP, making sure that, again, you're not, posting people's information on Facebook and social media, that you're using that data properly. And then finally, the 3I or the 3-1 model. It's either way, but 3I is how it is in the textbook. Within the context of intelligence-led policing is the 3I model that can be used to illustrate the purpose of crime analysis in modern policing environments. So the 3I model of intelligence-led policing consists of interpreting the criminal environment, influencing decision makers, and impacting the criminal environment. So that's kind of the essence of the 3I model. And here's a graphic that kind of looks at the intelligence-led policing, the ILP cycle on how it's used. So that's something that you can look at also in your textbook. Moving on to a thing called evidence-based policing, which is a little bit more prolific now, especially in the United States, although evidence-based policing was first advocated by criminologist Lawrence Sherman in 1998. It is only recently being discussed and written about. Basically, what evidence-based policing is it uses the best available research on the outcomes of police work to implement guidelines and evaluate agencies, units, and officers. Put more simply, evidence-based policing uses research or some academia to guide practices and evaluate practitioners. So do things work or does it not work? And that's part of the evidence-based research model. So it uses research to guide and practice. Effective research obviously is more important. You partner up, or you can partner with colleges or universities to really find out whether or not something's going to work or not. And part of that is reporting failure. We're not going to spend a lot of time on Target Safe City program. I'm going to actually let you read that because we are coming up on the end of our 40 to 45 minutes. We are going to look quickly at data-driven approaches to crime and traffic safety. So not only can you use data-driven approaches to crime, but you can use it for traffic safety. So another model to consider in the discussion of data-driven policing is the data-driven approaches to crime and traffic safety, and they call it DDAX. The DDAX is an initiative, a model that follows very closely to ILP and EBP, so the two other components that we just talked about, and community policing. This operational model is supported by a partnership between the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Bureau of Justice Assistance and the National Institute of Justice, and uses location-based crime and crash data to more effectively and efficiently deploy law enforcement resources. So you could see how, as they start to use this data that you get. So this model's dynamic approach uses evidence-based policing such as geomapping to collect crime and crash information, working with community members using strategic intelligence to fight and reduce crime and to improve traffic safety. The model collects local intelligence to identify crime and traffic-related hotspots, a technique referred to as spatial clustering. So we're not going to go into all that hoopla there, that spatial clustering, but basically it identifies hotspots, and whether it's crime or traffic accidents, you can use the same information, okay, or the same formulas, if you will, to deal with traffic issues. So, while you're identifying hotspots of, say, narcotics sales or auto thefts, you can do the same thing as it relates to crashes. And then finally, as we start to finish up, the last thing we'll look at here is a thing called predictive policing. Final model to examine in this discussion of data-driven policing is predictive policing, also known as PredPol, which some contend will become the next era of policing. Predictive policing was developed by 2 university professors in California and first implemented by the Los Angeles Police Department as a tool to forecast where burglaries and auto thefts were most likely to occur. And basically it uses an algorithm, it's just a formula, to convert crime data into crime forecasting, much like the modeling technology used by meteorologists to predict weather events. So here it is. We know that they don't always get the weather right, so we do have to be very careful in dealing with predictive policing because they may not always get the crime predictions right. But what it will do is help you forecast where certain crimes are going to possibly occur. So this way this technology will allow agencies to put officers at the scene of potential crimes before they actually happen. And if you can deter a crime, that's one less crime that will take place, which moves into the point here of crime reduction. And that, of course, for any chief of police or anyone working in law enforcement is great anytime you can reduce crime. So quickly in summary, 2 critical elements of community policing are partnerships and problem solving. One key partnership law enforcement can make is with private security, and we talked about the kind of better relationships that are now there with private security and law enforcement. Problem solving requires police to group incidents and thereby identify the underlying causes of problems in the community. So if you can identify that root cause of why something's taken place, you can work towards crime reduction. And 3 data-driven strategies in policing are CompStat policing, intelligence-led policing, and evidence-based policing. And that will pretty much conclude the lecture for this week. And of course, if you have any questions, please post it on the general discussion board. But other than that, I will talk to you again next week. Have a great week, everybody. Goodbye.